we should make a start. So this is unusual. You usually have Jerry's dulcet tones, and now you've got me. Surprise! Jerry is here. His video's off. He had a hospital appointment today, and he's feeling a little bit under the weather. So I'm taking over from Jerry, and obviously his video's off because he didn't want to see everybody to see his like rugged good looks spoiled. So he is here. He really wanted to participate tonight. Thank you very much also for the committee, Stephen and Jim. Is Dan in yet? I can't see Dan. Is Dan in yet?
Oh.
Dan might be on his way. But yes, so cheese tasting for the Cambridge 100 Club, that's a first. As many of you know, we usually have quarterly dinners in not COVID times. Very nice quarterly dinners at Jesus College with lovely wine and lovely food, and where we get an expert to talk about, well, a whole range of subjects. Now, tonight, we've really been missing the food element and the wine element of our get-togethers. And we still have an expert in the room. So Perry, that's going to be over to you because let's face it, they didn't come to see me. And yeah, over to you, Perry. Thank you very much. Oh, and just, I think you can, you're going to let people just ask questions as we go through. Keep yourself muted, please, during whilst Perry's talking. But obviously, if you've got a question, use the chat box to type your question, or just let me know that you've got a question, or raise your hand, your physical hand if you want. I'll try and keep an eye on it, but I'm sure Perry will has done many of these, so I'm sure he'll be fine to take these questions. And so, Perry, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it to be part of, you know, one of your Cambridge 100 evenings. And yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about the structure. We're going to chat a little bit about British cheese, Rennet and Rind, what an affineur is. But the structure of the evening is that we're going to begin to get your cheeses out in this order if you haven't already. You know, if you've got them sort of warming up 45 minutes before, that would be great. If not, don't worry about it. You can't go back in time. But yeah, in this order, coming down, they're all labelled up, so you can begin to get those out, save you rustling around from anything. And we'll pause after every cheese, and I'll just say, does anyone want to ask questions? Unmute yourself. And yeah, just fire away. And if you find yourself you've got a really burning question that's not going to stick in the mind, then just unmute yourself and interrupt me. It's not a problem at all. Yeah, so I'm Perry from Rennet and Rind. I'm a world cheese judge twice. Last year, not last year because COVID was around, the year before that, I judged in Bergamo, Italy. Year before that, Bergen. I'm a qualified affineur, so I trained over in France with a chap called Hervé Mons. And affineur is a very new thing in the UK, actually. It's to refine cheeses. So it's the part of the maturing. And that's where we really specialise. So you're with me here in the cave. This is our maturing rooms over in Papworth, Cambridge. And I use selective pressures, so that's temperature, humidity, turning, brushing, washing cheeses to make sure it's at peak perfection. And I only do British cheeses. So obviously it's been a tough year for British cheesemakers with restaurants being shut, but it seems like the British public are buying more British cheese, which is absolutely fantastic. So I also run the Academy of Cheese, which is the first qualification that you can get within the UK for cheese. So I'm currently a fellow of cheese. Master is on its way coming out, but that's just being written up at the moment. So let's get stuck into our first cheese, right? So let's navigate to this blackish rind one that you can that you'll be able to see. This is Cornish kern, and this is made by the fabulous Catherine Mead. And Catherine Mead is very special to the British Artisan cheese industry because she's also responsible for making Cornish yard. And Cornish yard is like the household name of British cheese. It really put us on the map, put a stake in the ground. And she came up with this cheese about 4 to 5 years ago. It went to the World Cheese Awards in 2018 and it won Supreme Champion, making it the best cheese in the world for that year. So what we do when I'm judging cheese, we visually inspect the cheese. So we have a look at the the interior of the cheese, we can see it's that yellow color. That indicates to us that it's cow's milk. Now, cows, when they eat grass, they don't absorb the beta-carotene, the colouring essentially in the grass, and that gets passed through to the milk. That's why you get yellow. Sheep and goats, they absorb it and actually use it as nutrition. So that's why you see white and yellow. So that's the first indication that you can see on the cheese. Of course, we've got this stark, awesome black rind that's on it. This is a mix between wax and plastico, which is used in manchego and other styles, but this is still an artisan cheese and it's brushed on delicately. And what this does is lock moisture into the cheese. This is a real Alpine style cheese. So I recently wrote an article, well, probably a couple of months back now, at BBC Good Food, saying this is one of the cheeses which showcases us as fantastic cheesemakers. So I've always been looking for a cheese called Conte, but a British style of it. And I think this achieves it. So first thing we do, we've done the visual, aroma. So we pull out to the nose, nice and close. Give it a sniff in. The first thing that we get, the big flavors that we're getting, aromas are nuttiness, sweetness is there, background of dairy, bit of burnt caramel, some little bit of baconiness, but nothing too strong. Nice and mellow kind of nutty smell, which is awesome for our first cheese to start up. So it won't keep you too long. You can crack into this one. So, and then pop it in the mouth, you know. So really easy going, nice and mild. That nuttiness that we smelt on aroma is now coming through. It's really important to chew your cheese with your mouth slightly open. I'm sure your guests will allow you to do so. That allows oxygen. Oxygen is really important. On the palate, 5 simple flavors. Sweet, savory, salty, bitterness and acidity. Those 5 simple flavors. In the nose, like 50,000 plus. So getting that oxygen over the palate into the nose really is going to unlock those flavors. So nice, smooth texture. So I mature these right here. So this is what they come out as in whole. So what you can see, this little bit of penicillium that's forming on here, but it won't affect the cheese too much. As you can see, you can't see into the cheese, which will help keep the moisture in there, making it nice and smooth. This is a aged cheese. That age is causing moisture to remove at a slow rate, a gentle application of, they're called calcium lactate crystals, which form into the cheese, give you a little bit of crunch. If you're lucky in yours, you might have some, a little bit of crunch, pushing up those amino acids into the cheese and then creating these cool flavors. We've got nutty, that smoky kind of bacon edge at the end, and huge amounts of longevity. I love the way this cheese is unnoticeably granular. It's almost like making a roux. It's got that flour kind of element to it, and it's just nice and smooth for our first cheese. So that's our first cheese. Any questions?
I think they're still eating.
Oh yeah.
Very. Let me start with a question then.
Thanks, Simon.
Particularly intrigued. Very lovely cheese, by the way.
Thank you.
But intrigued on 2 fronts. The first one was a question I was always going to ask, and one that you've just prompted me to ask. So the first one is, it was noticeable that you suggest we drink beer, not wine, which feels completely wrong, but I'm sure you'll tell us why. And then secondly, I'm allergic to penicillin, and generally try to avoid blue cheese. You know, I don't know whether you comment on that or bothered about it or what.
Yeah, well, so the first one, cheese and wine beer pairings, or, you know, any pairings, you know, you're essentially looking at those 5 simple flavors I was talking about, working out what's missing and then pairing with it. But a really easy way to do pairings is to find what the locals are making in terms of alcohol. And we're big beer makers over here. Not so much wine, it's coming along greatly. And there's some great examples just down the road from us in Saffron Walden. If you look for a cheese which is in an area and a locally brewed beer, which is kind of a locale favourite, they tend to go together. And British cheese, because predominantly we're beer makers and lager, etc., it just tends to pair. well. And in France, obviously predominantly winemakers, Italy, exactly the same. So you kind of see those, I came up with this idea that it's called like community taste bud. So the people of Cornwall got this cheese and were like, it's fantastic. We want to buy more of it. Eventually that ascended to a level where they were like, it needs to go further. So those local taste buds were correct on a national scale. So you kind of draw the same comparison with their local best beer or lager that will go with it, and that will kind of push it up. So that's a real rough way to kind of really mess with the kind of pairings there. But there is huge caveats and variants to that, but that's roughly why I tend to choose beer lager over, over wine.
Perry, does that mean that Scottish cheese would go with iron brew?
Yeah, it's bang on. Yeah. A bit of iron brew with a bit of Scottish cheese would work perfectly. You know, I think that's a bit of a one.
Go on.
Can I say, Perry, we had it with this sparkling New Zealand wine from, oh, you probably can't see it.
Well, there you go. You've found it.
Cambridge Wine Merchants. And it really works. It's really excellent, the pairing.
You've nailed it there, David, because what you're looking for, right, this is a sweet cheese. There's a little bit of bitterness that's in there. You've got the dairy that's kind of high. But what you are missing in this cheese is the acidity. So you can either, when you're doing a pairing, clash them together or let them go along one another. If you let them go alongside one another, that's a complicated pairing. Something normally goes wrong. But if you find what's missing in terms of the acidity in this cheese and pair it with a lovely glass of sparkling to cut right through that, 9 times out of 10 it works.
How when you say it's an aged cheese, how old is this cheese?
Yeah, so this one would be about, this batch specifically is about 7 months old, this one. So it's quite younger on the scale of what we have. But I've got cheeses that I mature here for up to 32 to 36 months, depending if they're okay. All the profiles change. I think that's the interesting thing about artisan cheese. Every cheese is different. You know, when you're doing a wine pairing, on the back of the bottle, the vintage, it tells you what it tastes like, and that's what it will taste like. Cheese is alive. There's tons of microflora that are around the cheese that would change the cheese. That's fermentation for you. And what you would get is these ups and downs all the time, and they would change. And what I'm trying to do is look for that best kind of area where it would go out. And that's what an affineur is to do. So, so maturations vary, Ping, if that's your name. Maturations vary, but it's just got to be when the profile's right for someone. So I love this profile because it's got a good level of dryness. So it's a good start, but it's also got a creamy, it kind of comes together as well. It's nice and easy, and that slight dryness gives it longevity. So it's a good cheese because normally on our first one, that's kind of when we take a lot of questions because everyone's been thinking about questions. So it's a good one for us to continue to taste for a while.
Can I just ask, actually, Perry, we get this pumpkin jam from Norfolk Street Bakery, which is fantastic. And that really goes with that cheese. It's quite a sweet jam. I mean, how do you pick a kind of an accompaniment for a cheese?
Yeah, well, it's that clashing that I was talking about. What would be interesting in that pumpkin is it slightly earthy? Does it have a slight, you know, like, because pumpkin always gives me a slight earthy vibe, you know, almost roots almost. And once again, we're missing that in that cheese. The dirt, the kind of soil, the kind of terroir, which would come with some other cheeses. We're missing that. So the pumpkin, if it's got that might work, and the sweetness probably would just be just as good as well. Simon, I'm aware I didn't answer your second question, I believe. Okay, could you remind me what it was? A few more have happened in between there.
No, thank you. It was just the point, because you mentioned penicillin, and I've always wanted to ask. I've only ever made my own sort of decisions about it, but I just wondered if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, so penicillium, like Camembert, Penicillium roquefort, are little powders or liquid that go into your milk. So essentially, it's like making a recipe. You know, you get your milk and you put these powders and liquids in. They create bacteria within the cheese, and your cheese in time will either become Penicillium camembert, Penicillium roqueforti, blue cheese, so on and so forth. The amount they use is very minimal. Now, I have to be really careful here, Simon, because it's on a scale up and down of how sensitive you can be to it. But the bacteria that they originally use are usually eaten up and then transposed to something different. So, but there has been studies that have found that Penicillium roqueforti, which is solidly in blue cheese, reduce inflammation on the lungs in particular. So there's loads of interesting things like that. But as I said, that is present in these cheeses, and it just depends on what scale you're on of how strong they are.
Thank you. Don't panic. I do eat blue cheese and broccoli soup occasionally, so it's not going to kill me.
Well, I would say that the blue that we have tonight, skipping ahead, is what I call like a once in a lifetime profile. It's, as I said, cheeses are up and down all the time and they change. And you have that one experience with the cheese, which you love, and you're always chasing that. So you're repeating the maturing methods, turning, brushing, changing the areas, but one batch comes along and it's just superb, and you're a bit like, I would never replicate it again. So it would be really unfortunate if you missed out on the blue, because I'm in love with it.
Perry, I've just noticed we've had a question here from Andrea. Andrea, did you want to unmute and ask your question? Oh.
Is it in the chat? I can have a look in the chat. I'll try and almost.
Yeah. Is the best part of this cheese at the center, not near the edge?
That's subject to opinion, that is. So if you imagine what's happening, right? Let me just get a bigger cheese out. Let's get this one. So the rinds of the bacteria of the cheese are all alive. And essentially what they do, they send out tendrils into the cheese, and then chemistry happens essentially, and they break down proteins and things like that into amino acids. So if you imagine that process happening, that's going to happen quicker on the outside than the inside. So there's a huge gradient happening from the rind to the nose of the cheese. So it's subject to opinion. Middle is more creamier, tends to be more mild. Nearer to the rind is a little bit more hardcore. So it kind of depends. And this kind of harks back to a time where also the way that you should cut cheese. And that's why you should give everyone the perfect nose to rind portion. I hope that answers it, Andrea. It's not really an answer, is it, actually? It's more of an opinion, I suppose. Yeah, just work out which one should be better, just under the rind or just near the nose, what you prefer. Okay, any more questions? It can be about the cheese or the industry in general, so don't be shy.
When you're a professional taster, how long do you leave between each cheese? And how do you manage yourself through a whole tasting? And you know, how do you avoid your flavors going off? I mean, do you have a cheese spittoon?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Colin, actually. One that I haven't been asked on the virtuals, actually, which is very good. Is actually, yeah, so at the World Cheese Awards, so in Bergen the first year, there was 72 cheeses to try in 4 hours. So, and then they tend to kind of move in an area of kind of weaker. So we're talking buffalo mozzarella, mascarpone, that kind of style cheese, high moisture and more kind of delicate flavors. So you begin there, you have an unlimited amount of Granny Smiths. Granny Smiths are remarkable at erasing any cheese memory that you have in your previous palate. A lot of water and a lot of eating cheese over time. I mean, on Monday, so I have, you know, currently 72 different styles of cheese. And then on top of that, I have different batches at different ages. So on Monday, I try half of those batches, utilizing a tool which we'll go into later. So you kind of get used to interfering flavors, and it's a good question because it's almost like a part of that brain that you shut off, that you kind of work out what's going on with that batch, and then you kind of shut that off, have some water, Granny Smith, and then move on to the next cheese and then begin again. But you kind of, if it's still lingering, you kind of half remember those notes.
Thanks. And do you find that as you fill up, you have to carefully manage your perception of flavour?
So, so perception as in I'm getting full, am I not enjoying this much?
Well, is there any change in your perception of flavour as you go from hungry to full?
I mean, I'm trying very minuscule amount of cheese, you know, we're talking sort of
Right.
Top of the fun piece. So, and you know, it tends to be, you know, a little bit of not eating anything beforehand and the night before to make sure that you don't get full up. But you can get cheese fatigue, but I think, and this may sound extremely sad, but the adrenaline of going to Bergamo, Italy, being with fellow cheesemongers who absolutely love their industry, you kind of power through that hunger barrier, you know. So, so yeah, it doesn't. I haven't had that problem yet, you know.
Lovely, thanks.
No problem. Anyone else? Cool, let's move on to our next cheese. So next up we have Montgomery Cheddar. So it's this one here. It kind of looks like a cheddar. It's got a kind of kind of patterny rind that's there. I'll give you all 5 minutes to kind of locate this. So this is an unpasteurised traditional cloth-bound cheddar, which is made down in Somerset by a chap called Jamie Montgomery. The Montgomery has been in the family for 500 years. And I love this batch at the moment, purely because it's a bit understated and it's very complex. A cool thing about this cheese, which I always try and put one on, Gareth would know this from previous tastings, that if you smell the rind of this cheese, it will give you an insight, the rind, specifically the rind, an insight to what this room smells like. Now, I can't argue that it's going to be pleasant, but you can smell the moisture, the cave, the water. This is a high humidity area. We don't want any water escaping from the cheese. And that's really important. So if you want an idea of smell-o-vision, this will give you an idea of what I'm smelling around me right now. You'll also notice that it's got a little pattern on the side. That's from the cloth bound. So that's a traditional cloth bound cheddar, not processed, not extruded, not waxed. It's made by hands and real people, which is awesome to see. So if we have a look again at the colour, yellow, indicating that it's a cow's milk. As I said, it's unpasteurised, so the milk hasn't been heat treated. If we go on aroma, we've got a nice bit of tang there. It's not too strong. It's actually quite, in comparison to the kern, it's quite weak. It's got a bit of acidity there, grassiness, milkiness that's going on in the background, and a slight bit of savoury, but nothing too much. You'd have to sniff quite hard to kind of work out how powerful the cheddar is, which is quite crucial, actually. So if we give it a taste. Now, this is what I was talking about before. This is a chewy cheese. As you begin to chew it, your jaw can't help but to push down. Oxygen rushes over. We get those unlocked of flavours. It's not too big. It's not a big, showy cheese. It's what I was describing the other day as a session cheddar. It's got those nice complex notes. The acidity is running all the way through. Slight element of earthiness that's coming in from that nice moist rind, the wet rind. And then these beautiful savoury notes at the back and a nice dryness with the bitterness, which is really nice. And what I think this cheese is that if you went to a counter and someone said, oh, do you want to try this? Up front, you probably would be like, go for another cheddar, because it's not all song and dance, I suppose. But on longevity, it's huge. It's still developing now. The acidity now has turned into a lemony finish, which is quite nice, which catches you up here. It's just a really beautiful style of cheddar. And, you know, I think that it's a bit underrated, Montgomery's. What does everyone think of that?
Yeah, I think that's really lovely, actually. Yeah, definitely flavour comes out as you chew it.
Yeah, it's just nice and easy though, isn't it? I mean, that we're so forced down this path at the moment with big impactful flavours in the supermarket counters. Really tangy, really strong. And what they do is they just have a short life. That experience is gone within 30 seconds, where a true artisan aged cheddar will last minutes. You know? I think it's a great example of British cheddar.
Yeah, can I just ask, in our piece of cheese, we've got a blue vein running just inside. I don't know whether you can see where I'm pointing. Just inside the rind. Yeah. Can you? I don't know whether you can see it.
Yes, you can.
Is that something that you would expect to be generated fairly regularly? Is that sort of something that?
So in the judging world, we would mark that down. That's not meant to happen when you're making cloth-bound cheddars. But in Jamie Montgomery's cheddar world, it does all the time. It's a common joke that his cheese always cracks. And what it is that if I've got a little tool here, I'll kind of pick this up. This is to scale kind of cloth-bound cheddar. You get your form ready, and then you put loads of cloth around the top of it, and then you lard your cheese. And what larding does, it creates a sealant around the cheese, which if the cheese cracks, oxygen cannot come through because it's a barrier. Jamie Montgomery has never larded his cheese. He's tried before, and it doesn't change. It changes the flavour to something that he doesn't like, and he loses about 25% of his stock where cheese becomes completely blue. It was particularly bad, I remember, in what year would have been 2019, where he lost a lot of cheeses, because sometimes it can be too much. But I've always loved the kind of little veins of blue that I get in Montgomery's. If my guys find it when they're cutting up the cheese, they tend to leave it to one side for me, because it's just a nice little quirk and a distinctive character, and doesn't impede flavour that much. If you actually taste that blue area, it would actually be slightly more creamy. Give it a go. Any questions?
Got a generic question.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of cheese here, and there's only 2 of us. Realistically, how close do we have to adhere to the use-by date, or how can it, is there a way of knowing when a cheese has gone off, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult. Cheese is a fermented product. We are removing moisture, placing in salt as a preserve, and these cheeses will last a very long time. So essentially, when you're making cheese, the milk is tested at that point. So it's tested for Staphylococcus or TB or whatever. At that point is the only point where pathogens can get within the cheese. So if you logically think about it, cheese will be fine forever. The only kind of problem that we have is us, So as you get your cheese and you handle it with your fingers and things like that, bacteria comes off and then it thrives on the rinds of the cheeses. And that tends to be what destroys cheeses and can make them dangerous, if you've got pathogens on your fingers, and can make you feel upset. But I've had cheese like Breeze, which have been matured for a year and a half, so these things, they almost turn into fudge. Most of these cheeses that we're looking in front of us, apart from the soft and the blue, have been aged plus 4 to 5 months. And it kind of goes to show you that cheese in itself is an antiseptic. The bacteria, the good bacteria, always beats the bad. And that's the conditions that we use in the maturing room to make sure they always prevail. And at home, you have far longer than you usually have. But the only thing I would say is, yes, of course, go by the use-by. That's what you need to do. But I would always say, trust your nose. You will know in yourself instinctually when the cheese is not quite right. My partner will say that's a terrible idea, because I'm always lopping off, lumps and bumps of mold to enjoy a cheddar. I can't let cheese go to waste. I hope that answers it.
I've got a very generic question about cheese.
Yeah.
How long have people been making cheese?
Oh, God. Okay, so we go back to the first remnant is Neolithic period, Fertile Crescent. So that's Iraq kind of area. So that's kind of where first agricultural farming kicked off. And everyone at that time was lactose intolerant. So nobody could consume milk straight from the cow, for example. I mean, I'm sure they would. I'm sure they wouldn't let it go to waste for an upset stomach, for example. But what they wanted to do was unlock the way that essentially we can unlock the nutritional value of milk without the lactose. And that's what making cheese does. And this is what confuses me. Aged cheeses have very, very little lactose in. Fresher cheeses, yeah, they have a bit more. But a part of cheese making is actually converting lactose into lactase, which is milk sugars. So no longer, so normally when people say I'm lactose intolerant, I say, well, it's normally something else actually in dairy, probably not lactose, that you're intolerant to. So they unlocked that, the Neolithic period, unlocked that ingredient for the nutritional value. There's rumours it was discovered in the desert. As someone was trying to transport their milk over land, it was a hot day. They used the fourth stomach in a ruminant animal called the abomasine, and they put their milk in there, rennet on the side, curdled the milk, and you had your first cheese. I don't quite believe that, but it's a nice educational story to get the message across that rennet clots milk and makes it curdle. And then, yeah, I mean, it's journey to here, you know, you're thinking, you know, Iraq area, Fertile Crescent, and you're going Eurasia and then into kind of Europe. And then look at all those influences you have. You've got the saints of like chapels experimenting with wash rind cheeses, Romans coming through to produce us wash rind, harder cheeses. And yeah, that's a whole, I can talk about that for about 2 hours. But yeah, thousands of Neolithic periods are the first remnant of milk protein being used in a clotting way in pots. So yeah.
That's our next webinar, 2 hours of Perry talking about this.
Oh, it's such a fascinating story. You know, we could go into World War II, the dip of cheese production in the UK, the resurgence, being sheep cheese makers. Anyway, any other questions? Cool. Talking about sheep's cheeses, our next cheese up is Berkswell, which is this cheese here. So it's the one with the curved edge. It's a bit more paler in colour, a little bit more ivory white, and this is because it's a sheep's milk cheese. So the cheeses whole come like this, which you've seen this one before. So these are little UFO shapes because they were first made in colanders. And what you see on here is that there's some, well, you probably can't see there. If you was in person, I'd be showing you. But there's some interesting molds that are developing on here. They're called chrysothorium sulfate. And the French call this the yellow flower. This is what I learned in, oh, I think you found some, Tanya. You know, you found some mold on the side of your cheese, which is, that's like jackpot. So when you kind of when I went to France and I trained, all the French maturers, because it's a big deal over there, were all after the yellow flower. And that's an indication it increases mushroomy kind of notes in your cheese, but increases savouriness. So what I do with this one, if I realise this has got a huge growth of that yellow mold, then I utilise a brush and then I'll rub down the outside of this cheese, and then I utilise the same brush to brush my other cheeses. And that will promote growth. In terms of the way chrysosporium is formed, it's like little trees. So essentially you've got little seeds on the edge of the trees. And as you shake those, if you brush in and embed those molds into the cheese, then those seeds will obviously break off and then reproduce and hopefully produce a really good flavour of cheese. So yeah, Berkswell, talking about history, we were legendary sheep's cheese makers. Before Roman time, this is what we did. This is what we're known for. If you think about it logically, sheep can be renewable. You know, you can use their wool for warmth. You can use their milk for drinking and making cheese. Where cows, you kind of just have the milk and the leather. So sheep farming was hugely popular in the UK before the Romans arrived, and we were predominantly, so this is kind of more like the cheese that you would see, you know, before the Romans arrived. So in terms of smell, beautiful acidity we've got there, clean, really clean, slight bit of nuttiness at the end. This is kind of like a model on a pecorino parmesan style cheese. So if we give it a taste. So what's nice about it, we have this really nice warmth there that's like a minerality kind of thing. It's kind of moist, but also dry at the same time. It's kind of dual textured, which is quite interesting. We've got that acidity, which is running through, and then we've got that dryness, which would be really nice with a nice creamy white wine potentially, or even a soft dessert wine. Yeah, I mean, the tannins in the red could work, they could work actually. But it's a nice zingy cheese, and it's got a little bit of pepperiness at the back. What you begin to feel after it dissipates on the palate is a bit of pepperiness back there. That's linking to a thing called trigeminal nerve, and it's got a bit of farmyardy to it, a little bit of lambiness kind of in there as well, which is quite nice nods to know that you're eating a sheep's milk cheese, which is quite nice. What do we think of this?
Loving the taste of this. It's really full, round. I can't think of the best way to describe it, but it's yeah, totally different to the others, obviously.
Yeah, it's got a slight, almost the saltiness in there to me is a little bit like a Parma ham saltiness. That roundness is coming almost like that kind of warmth that's there. And I think, yeah, it makes it very quite, if you engage and think about it, it makes it actually surprisingly meaty, which is quite nice.
So Perry, you said it was nutty, the cheese. And interestingly, I've got a tree nut allergy. When I have this cheese, just like I have some other, like Manchego or something, I sometimes sense on my tongue a slight sense of the same feeling I get if I accidentally have an almond or a walnut or something like that. And I'm wondering if the same protein might be in the tree nuts as in the nuttiness of this cheese. Is that possible?
Yeah. How are you with like shellfish? Are you okay with shellfish?
Fine, no problem.
Well, what you normally find is aged cheeses produce a huge amount of histamine. So actually the thing that causes irritable rashing, that pepperiness we're talking on the back, is actually an allergic reaction, you know. It's possible that the proteins that you find in nuts, if they have, I know they have like peanuts have a high degree of histamine, you might detect them in there as well. And
I'm not allergic to peanuts. Groundnuts I've got no problem, which is interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, everyone's different, right? But I mean, I think it's I think
it could be histamine is the thing that's coming out of the cheese.
I would hazard it, because if I'm working with this cheese all day, so I roll up my sleeves, brushing them and turning them, what I would begin to get is almost like a rash on my forearms, and you know that's called sort of cheesemongers rash or something like that, as a popular name for it. And I looked into it ages ago, and it's actually histamine. And you find that most people that get that sharp reaction, you know, tend to have some kind of allergy, or, you know, not a severe one, I suppose. I've never known, you know, a connection between nuts and nutty cheese. Because I suppose, did the first one provide?
No, no reaction at all.
Yeah.
Just this one, and I've had this one before. Now, I remember last time I had a slight reaction on my tongue, you know, just on the verge of it.
So this one is more nutty, so that's interesting, because it's a proper Brazil nut kind of, you know, big nutty number, where this is definitely really high in histamine, which is a nice kind of mouthfeel to have, you know, for certain people. But I love the way it's got, you know, we've had the creaminess on the palate from the kern, the kind of chunkiness of the Montgomery, then moving into a drier, kind of sharper and tinglier Berkswell. Thanks, Ray.
Perry?
Yes.
Apologies for this. It's not about this particular cheese. It's one of your general questions.
That's okay. General questions are welcome.
Well, I'm sure you're going to know the answer, but cheese and nightmares.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I eat a lot of cheese and I never really have any nightmares. So I think it's an old wife's tale. And also, I think it's related to, there was a study essentially which was linked to dehydration and nightmares. So essentially, the more dehydrated that you are, the more likely you're going to wake up with a headache, have quite vivid dreams. Now, where this wives' tale kind of originated was back in the day where we would have to hang on to cheese and mature it for a very, very long time. So higher dryness, higher dehydration, there was a lot of drinking there. And I think that's where the connection came from. But so far, I've only heard that actually cheese can give you pleasant dreams, being well nourished, you know, before you go to bed, if you eat it, to round off the meal. And that's it. But I don't think anyone's done any in-depth research as of yet.
I like to have vivid dreams, like very coloured, lots of vibrance in them. Yeah. And I find if I have a piece of Parmesan before I go to bed, I get much better dreams than if I don't. It might not be the cheese. It might be just the act of having the cheese. Who knows? But it's very reliable. If I have a piece of Parmesan, I can get much better dreams.
Well, it's interesting because then there's that connection between the dryness of Parmesan, and also Parmesan is quite high in histamine as well, one of the most highest cheeses. So you may be, you know, eliciting a psychedelic response there, right? You know, with your cheese, which, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's great.
Ray, where are you buying your cheeses?
Through Amazon usually. The Parmesan, I guess. Or even, well, just Waitrose Parmesan works.
Sounds more like dark web to me.
Look, Ray and Simon, just keep checking in so we're not worried about you.
Yeah.
For me, it's soft blue cheeses, the sort of Cambozola and Santagur. Too much of that, and absolutely guaranteed to have some smashing nightmares that wake you up in a sweat. But my question is, I was once driving through rural Germany and bought some cheese from a local shop, and it was really hot on the tongue. Do you know what those cheeses are all about?
It could be a cheese which is called Breinmock, which visually, does it have loads of little holes in it? If you can remember. Oh, you've muted yourself there, Colin.
Sorry. It was a long time ago, like 35 years, and it was in my first car. But I just remember it was really hot on the tongue. It's just surprising.
I would think that would be a cheese called Breinmock, like, which I know of being like this, like the Berkswell, but hyper aged. But then it's got the installation of like an Alpen style. So those holes in the cheese, holy cheeses. And they really push up that bacteria, which pushes up CO2. And CO2 tends to react with the proteins in cheese to create huge amounts of histamine. So you'll see these ones, and they're called Breinmock, and they're always a little bit bowed. And there's chances that they will explode quite a lot. And whenever I've had them, it's a real intense, hot, you know, kind of histamine allergic reaction. So it could be that. But Breinmock is a version that I've had, but it's a very common cheese over there, which they tend to love. Not common, it's a common artisan cheese in like Bavaria region, which is aggressive holes and aggressive chemical reactions within the cheese, creating more histamine and just that real spicy flavour.
It was quite an experience.
But you had some dreams after that, Colin?
I don't actually remember.
You ask.
What creates holes in cheese?
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, you've got your starter culture. You put your starter culture in your milk, and that starter culture essentially is your ingredient to make what cheese you're going to produce. With holy cheeses, Swiss cheeses, the bacteria in that is small little kind of microorganisms, and when they settle down in a nice warm heat, they begin to breathe. And as they breathe, those holes, and that's why you see them being perfectly circular. It's almost like, you know, because as they breathe, it's a perfect amount of pressure to create those holes. They're basically like orbs, actually, within the cheese, you know. So that, I hope that answers the question. They're not little mice, I'm afraid.
No, that does. Thank you very much. Just a quandary in the household.
It's not the old thumb of the local mother.
No. It's small little bacteria breathing out CO2, creating little severes, and they actually always look holy, don't they? But they're actually always severes, you know. Yep. But like I said, you could, in most Alpine style cheeses, you have to be really careful because most of them are fed on haylage, and haylage is kind of fermented feed. Now, fermented feed in cows produce huge amounts of bacteria, you know, and cause cows to be quite gassy, I suppose. And you need another starter culture to actually bring that down. Because like I said, what you get is cheeses bursting in maturing rooms. And that compounded pressure, when I was working in the Auvergne region with Hervé on Comté, there was a few blown cheeses and you would come in and they would literally like blast holes into these wooden shelves, you know? So quite powerful. Any other questions at this point? Perfect. Let's move on to our next cheese. This is Baronette, which is one of my favorite cheeses. This here. This is made by a lovely woman called Juliana. And Juliana is a Hungarian woman that emigrated to USA. She made 27 different styles of goat cheeses, and we're lucky enough to have her here down in Wiltshire. I love this cheese because this is a British version of a Reblochon style cheese. So what you're noticing, I'm seeing on Ping's iPad there that you're all smelling this right now. This is the one that's responsible for being smelly in your cheese box. And this is because we can see on the outer rind that we've got this peachy, wrinkly rind. Peachiness indicates that I've been washing this cheese. So I wash this cheese 3 times a week for 6 weeks in a brine solution. So water and salt. What that does, it creates bee linens on the rind, which allows an aggressive breakdown on the outer of the cheese. You should see this breakdown beginning to happen. And I pull it just before it gets to the core. So we have a nice dual texture, and I'll explain that in a minute for a reason. So this is made down in Wiltshire, Juliana. She uses Jersey cows. Jersey cows are particularly really hard to make cheese with. So essentially you have milk solids within cheese. So you got your solids. If you imagine a pint of milk like this, you know, about that much is actually solids that you make cheese out of. Now with Jersey cows, they change all the time. The solids go up and down, which makes the cheese extremely unpredictable to work with, and you need to be a very skilled cheesemaker to make them. So let's go with, as you can see, we've got this yellow texture that's in there. More white in the middle. Don't be confused, it's not sheep's milk, that's just more moisture. The more moisture you have in cheese, it's like freezing a pint of milk. When you freeze a pint of milk, it goes green, and that's because the water has become translucent, and that's when you can see the solids actually in milk. So it's a similar principle, really. So yeah, and smell, I mean, it's smelly socks, but actually it's more like fermented apricots. It's got a real fermented fruit kind of edge to it, which is quite nice, but it is quite powerful. So this is the one
do you eat it with the rind?
Yes, well, you don't have to. I'm not forcing anyone. It's entirely up to you. All the rinds except kern are edible tonight, and most of the rinds on cheeses are edible, you know?
Really?
Yeah. Unless you've got wax or plasticoat, this is called plasticoat. They're still edible, but they're just not nice. Where all the rinds on cheese, and that's kind of where the intense flavour is. What you want is from the rind, you normally get bitterness. In the middle of cheese, you get that creamy dairy, and those two worlds together go beautifully. So most of the rinds I really like to have with them. So yeah, lovely smell. Actually, in the centre, lactic dairy on the rind, fermented apricot kind of vibe going on, or fermented fruit.
Are these types of cheeses best to eat on their own or with a biscuit, for instance, because they're obviously quite squidgy and, you know, it's spreadable, so to speak?
I mean, if your one is particularly runny, then I'd recommend obviously a cracker to scoop it up. But I'd recommend quite a neutral cracker because the flavours are very delicate in this cheese. I mean, in terms of what we're getting fresh yogurt. That's up front, that yogurty kind of vibe that's going on. In the middle of the tracks, you've got that bitterness that's coming through, like skins of a walnut or skins of a nut. So hopefully Ray's okay. But what's incredible about this cheese, which is a bit of a revelation to me, It's a neutralizer. It's got a very alkaline element to it and a lactic kind of vibe as well to it. So it erases almost memory of all the previous cheeses that we've had. So it's a good one to set us up for a big show for our next cheeses. So it's a neutralizer. It's got this nice mineral saltiness, which retains fresh in the mouth. And then kind of, it's hard at this point, bearing back to Colin's question, at this point, to almost remember what the cheeses bit was before.
Perry, I had a quick question, if that's okay. I think this cheese is fantastic. I love soft cheeses like Camembert and Brie. Two things, I suppose. One is, if I was a cheese manufacturer and I give you my cheese, why don't you just buy it like already washed and ready? And second, the bit that's in the middle, sometimes it's chalkier than other times, and sometimes it's like, you know, it's virtually falling off the plate because it's so liquid, which is sort of like how I prefer it. But I'm just wondering, what's your view in terms of like the sort of the perfect point for a soft cheese?
In an awesome way, you've kind of answered your own question, David. So in terms of it, which is great, because they are like connected in a really cool way. So why would cheesemakers give me their cheese to mature on? And that's because I'm a qualified affineur. So I can get this cheese to 3 different profiles. This nice breakdown here, which we have lactic to soft, and then above that, you know, we have deep breakdown like runny, like Camembert. But what cheesemakers would do, you will order a cheese and they would just send it out. It would just be what it is. What I do, I work on multi-profiles. So this profile cheese here is here for a specific reason, and that's to wipe out the memory of the previous 3 cheeses that we've had. And that's where the expertise comes in. So I will choose cheeses for Michelin-star restaurants such as Midsummer House, Vanderlao in Cambridge, Restaurant 22, Parker's Tavern, all the Cambridge colleges I provide, profiles based on their experience and what they give to a board. You know, so for example, you love Camembert, I mature Winslade, which is a British style Vacherin, and I make sure that the breakdown happens on cooking, but also when you cut straight through it. So you cut straight through it and it just runs off the plate straight away. And that's my profile that I like. It also helps cheesemakers unlock cash early. So if you imagine that I'm buying cheese within a month of its life, but it's got 6 months to sit on their shelves, I'm buying it at that point, and it allows their cash flow. So it's a good thing to do. Does that answer the question, David?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, I didn't understand all of that. So because we were sat here thinking, well, why does a cheese producer, you know, hand over the cheese? But I think that's and I guess, sorry to have a follow-up question.
No, you're all right.
I guess that, you know, you form a relationship with, say, Midsummer House, and they say, actually, you know, we'd prefer it a little bit underdone, or, you know, what you know, yeah, at a certain level, whereas somebody else might say, well, we prefer it this way.
Yeah, and the problem is that you can't be anyone doing that. I think everyone, which you can do to a certain degree, but everyone's got an idea that it's just temperature. That's all you're doing, temperature and time. There is so much going on here. So in this room currently, on this compartment is 88% humidity, which is higher than usual really, and it's at a controlled average level. They're always between 87 and 90. And that gentle environment will allow cheese not to go wrong. If you get those wrong, then the cheese will just go bitter and horrible. You know, and there's another thing as well. Your fridge at home and in most storage units work differently. As the room gets hotter, your condensing unit spins in, blasts cold into the room, and your chart goes down. Heats up again, chart goes down. We have static cold here, so the cold is constant. It's pushing it down gently and it flows through the room. There's airflow in here, so you'll notice the careful spacing between these cheeses to make sure that if any air happens as all the doors are opened, that wind doesn't dry out the side of the cheese and crack the sides of the cheese. I know I'm going on here a bit, but it makes it it's very complicated. I think a lot of people think a cheese, specifically an artisan cheese, arrives in front of you, but there's a huge amount that goes into it. It's like these are Scandinavian redwood, and they've been kiln dried to 14.5%. That creates a great biofilm between the cheese and the wood, and that allows more molds to develop that are prominent, good flavors. So yeah, there's tons of different variables on why, and it's also, cheesemakers should be making cheese, right? You know, like they need to get it out. If they're getting it to, you know, some large customers or some large delis, you know, sometimes they don't really care what profile you have. It comes into me and I say, well, you know, they provide me graphs on how the milk looks in terms of the solids that are in the milk, and then I put out a maturing chart for it and then taste it at those increments for certain customers.
Sorry, Perry, I've just noticed you've got a couple of questions in the chat as well. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, can it be baked like a camembert? Well, this cheese is actually very, very good for a reblochon. So reblochon tartiflette. I don't know if anyone has ever made one of those before. Sliced potatoes, that on top, the stinky element comes through, the bitterness hits with the creaminess of the potatoes. I've done, what I do, I normally mature these up, I would say, you know, this profile is just not going to be a camembert, the one that I have here. No matter how long I mature it for, I've stunted the growth around the rind, so it's gone into a hotter area, and then as I'm happy with the breakdown on the outside, I've stunted it with chill. So I've chilled it, and that stopped the microbes from forming, which this cheese can be baked, but it just wouldn't be as pleasant as a camembert, to be perfectly frank.
Very.
Yes, this cheese is called Baronette.
Yes.
And we recently came across a cheese called Baron Bigod.
Oh yes, Johnny and Dulcie Crickmore, lovely people.
And I'm just wondering, it's not similar in taste, but it's not dissimilar in the sort of generic families. Is Baronette, is that a generic family of cheeses, or just happens to be coincidentally named?
Coincidentally named, but you are right, they do use a similar starter culture, Penicillium candidium. They use that starter culture. They're both on the same journey to becoming brie camembert style cheeses, but we wash this one, and that washing changes the profile dramatically. But Baron Bigod is a phenomenal cheese. I actually do 3 different profiles here. You know, one that's soft, fresh, lactic, and one that's deep and savoury with loads of mushroom cabbaginess going on. So yeah, it's a phenomenal cheese, but you need a good cheesemonger to make sure that that profile is absolutely bang on.
Right, thank you very much.
Perry, when you're dealing with somebody like Midsummer House, where, you know, all the waiters pretend to be French, for instance, do you get any snobbery around English cheese versus French cheese?
Yeah, so I think when I first set up Midsummer House, which was now, God, it would be 4 years ago, there was a French maitre d' there, and I went in to see him. That would have been about 5 years before. And I went in to see him, and I gave him, you know, sort of 5 of my cheeses, which were, you know, sort of, not 5 of them, 15 of my cheeses, the best profiles that I had when I began my sort of maturing journey. And they were lovely. They were just exceptional, and where they were, he didn't want to know. So I went back a year later, and I went on a mission to find Conte, Reblochon, you know, Pecorino. I went to find all continental cheeses, and I came back and I labelled them up specifically, the continental values of what they were. And then after him and, you know, Daniel came out and was like, these are really, really nice. And I was like, yeah. And he's, you know, chef at maitre d' is excited because they're all French. I'm like, and they're all British. And yeah, that's the story of us supplying Midsummer House, you know. So yes, there is some unfair bias that goes on against British cheeses, but we are fantastic at making cheese. We really are.
This is quite a potent as cheese on the outside. It reminds me of being sold some stinking bishop, which was it's a bit of a heavy handle. How do you recommend handling that? Because it is very potent when you unwrap it.
It's interesting because all these wash rind cheeses, their bark is far worse than their bite. I mean, they're you know, poacher, you know, if I could somehow cut off the rind and give you poacher, it wouldn't be as smelly. I mean, but they wash theirs in a perry, which cider and alcohol kind of kickstarts the fermentation that's in there. In terms of how do you handle a very well-aged stinking bishop, with a lot of skill and luck, hopefully, and maybe gloves, because they can be fairly difficult. A good thing for wash rind cheeses, if you're storing them, is always Tupperware. Always Tupperware. If they're becoming a problem in the house, which I frequently have that problem with smelly cheeses in the house, you know, your own Tupperware, or even better, Colin, your own fridge maybe of cheese.
Any outhouse.
Yeah.
We've got a son, a 10-year-old, who, mainly because every Friday night we don't have anything to eat other than cheese, loves cheese. Loves it. We don't eat any blue cheese in the house normally, but he loves all other types of cheese.
Wow.
Is there, random question, he's made cheese, he's had cheese kits, he eats cheese, he asked for cheese in his stocking. I can't remember what he got in his stocking this year that was cheese related. He loves raclettes, nothing makes him happier. Is there such a thing as a cheese course or anything anywhere in the country that we can send him on?
When COVID is over, I run the Academy of Cheese. So it's these little badges here. Where are they? This one here. So, and we can get people up to a level all the way up to master. So you can begin at, you know, the basic foundation level. That's like a day course. But honestly, I love children being infused about artisan cheese. You know, we get them up to farms and stuff like that. You know, just drop me an email afterwards, and if you want to go to a farm, I'll set it up for you guys locally wherever you live. You know, because
he would love to do a cheese course. It's just whenever we've looked at anything, it's like I'm not sure how they'd react to a 10-year-old.
I think they would absolutely love it, you know. And you know, when COVID is over, you know, you can come down here and do some maturing with me, turning cheeses, trying cheeses, learning those techniques that I learned in France and what I've learned over the last 10 years. So no, love youth getting into artisan cheese. So yeah, well done, good job, you guys. Any other questions that are there?
No, I just saw Jane Dorr has put a question that her cheese is liquid. Jane, did you want to say, what do you mean by liquid? Oh. No.
Well,
yeah.
Okay.
No, it's all right. I've got there in the end. It's Peter Dorr, actually.
Oh, hi, Peter.
When I compare our cheese with the one that you'll have, ours is much more liquid.
Oh, okay.
Is that an error? Are we lucky? Are we unlucky? Or
two things. So, as you can see, like, so all these belong. They all belong to the same batch, right? So what I do is that I grab a cheese iron, plunge into those, and then I say, hopefully all those batches will be the same. Otherwise, I'll be destroying cheeses every week and I'll be a poor man. So it can be either two things. One, something's gone wrong, you know, in terms of maybe delivery, something has gone wrong there. Or another thing, which is that it's just, you know, it's the, not in a bad way, but the run of the litter, I suppose. Does it taste good? Okay. I mean, I'm pretty confident there'd be nothing wrong with it, Peter. So more than that, just dig in and see what you think. Those bitter notes will go. The lactic shouldn't be there. Should be more dairy and a little bit more pongy. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess it came with all the rest on Monday, Tuesday.
Yesterday.
Yes. Oh, yesterday. So and in the fridge, and then just came out this afternoon, nice and warm, but yeah, much more liquid than that one.
Yeah. Is it nice though? Have you tried it?
It's to my taste.
Yeah.
You know, I always say there's no such thing as a bad beer, just one that you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be, you know, it would just be like, as I said, you know, that if I was breaking open every cheese and checking, you know, I've selected an environment for all these cheeses to grow in, you know, we're looking at, 50 kilos worth of cheese here. If I was plunging into every one, then so what I do is I plunge into one and say, as a rule of thumb, I think this cheese would be like all of those. So the batch that you have here is 5-week-old Baronette, which has been washed 3 times a week for 6 weeks, and then wrapped and chilled for a further 1 week. At that point, you know, when they're wrapped, all I can guess is that batch is together, and you just had a rogue one that was a little bit more active. Good on you.
Thanks.
No worries.
Harry, another deep-rooted cheese question for you from the Gibson family. We just wonder, you know, you do eat a lot of cheese. You know, do you treat yourself to a cheese and pickle sandwich, or can you just not stand the stuff when you're not working? Because it would be quite understandable if you said, well, it's my job and I saw the busman's holiday and just never eat it separately.
Yeah, this may not disappoint you, but I absolutely love cheese. I will eat it all day long, you know, and, you know, that's the part of being in this industry. It's a passion, it's love, it's enthusiasm for the craft and what they do. And essentially, you know, I don't think there's a food in the world where you can take milk, which tastes like, you know, yogurty, or it tastes like milk, and then it can taste of nuts. You know, and I find that absolutely fascinating, that you can hit pretty much any kind of tasting note on a board. So yes, I do eat a lot of cheese. I jog 3 times a week to kind of help me with that, which is important. There's a long standing rumor that at 35, at 32, you need to be careful, which is my age. I'm 33 in June, because a lot of people have high cholesterol at that point after being in the industry and eating as much cheese as I have. But I'm all good. So everything in moderation. And nice, it's totally nutritious. I find that if I have, you know, sort of 60 to 80 grams worth of cheese, then I won't want anything else to eat. I can really savor it and get into it. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I also just wanted to get a question in before we go to the blue cheese, in case I'm not here afterwards.
And Perry, going back to that point about, you know, the love of it, for the makers of the cheese, is there much money in it, or is it just a labor of love?
No, it's a labor of love completely. Yeah, it's not really, you know, it's yeah, I mean, I don't know how straight I can put that. It's better than selling your milk to Muller or Dairy Crest or something like that. You know, for example, you know, Muller, you would sell a pint of milk and you'd make 2p a litre off of it. And, you know, gradually farmers were going into more and more debt. And now what more and more farmers are doing, they have their raw milk dispensers, like Ping mentioned on Ping's cam, the Baron by God raw milk. And that can change you from having 2p to earning 2p a litre to earning 80p a litre. So yeah, it's a really great industry, you know, and it's full of passionate people that love what they do. And, you know, money is the last thing on their mind. It's more about community and retaining our British cheese heritage, you know, which we was making thousands of different styles of over the years. Yeah, it's a labour of pure love, you know, and although you encroach into the wax-based cheeses, you know, those small little Snowdonias or you know, whatever they may be. You encroach in that area, and that's where money gets involved, because they are giving you the appearance of artisan, but very corporate, you know. Any other questions?
Perry, can I ask you a general question? I love your passion for cheese.
Oh,
always great to see somebody very passionate about what they do. So a very wide-ranging question for you. If it was your last meal on earth, what top 2 cheeses would you select and why?
Okay, so I would choose good question, by the way. That's a good one. My favourite cheeses change every Monday. Every Monday I do the tasting. So it's unfair to ask me what my favourite cheese is. But if I was on death row and someone said I had to, at this moment in time, at this point in time, it would be this cheese here, Young Buck, because it's just sensational. Like I was saying, we're going into more detail. I think it's just the best profile that it will ever be. That's my favourite of the week. But unfortunately, it would have to be a French cheese called Délice de Bourgogne, because that is where it all started for me. That's the first time my mother gave me a piece of artisan cheese, which was triple creme. I think I ate a wedge of it like that. And I think that's where my fascination moved away from cheese strings to artisan cheese. So it would have to be that for nostalgic reasons. It's not my favorite cheese anymore, hasn't been for a long time, but just to reminisce about cheese. So Young Buck and a Délice de Bourgogne, triple creme.
That's great. Thank you, Perry. Thank you.
Watch out, David and cousin Caroline. That'll be your son with the cheese.
He sounds like he's on the path far.
I know, absolutely.
He's going to be taking my judging jobs and things like that, you know.
He would. I think he's a bit gutted that we sent him to bed, but you know.
How could you? That is quite cruel.
That's life when you're 10, right?
So before Christmas we buy cheese from a retailer in Cambridge, and that is the biggest thing in our children's life in the lead up to Christmas. And this year with COVID and not sure what shops would be open, we had to phone to check that they would be open so that we could go for crepes and then queue outside the cheese shop to buy Christmas cheese. And every year they take a photo. It's like, yeah, I mean, not a normal kid.
But we will be sure to come over to Papworth everyone.
Thanks for that. But yeah, no, like he's welcome down here anytime. You know, when COVID is over, we're just getting down here and turning some cheeses, brushing. It's free labour at the end of the day, and that's all I'm interested in. So, so I've got some questions here. As looks very so excellent. Room temp for 48 hours. Yeah, that could really break it down quite rapidly. Your Baronette room. Where is somewhere locally which sells raw milk? Well, I'm trying to get a place near where I live, Ashwell, to actually to put in a raw milk dispenser. So that might be the most local place. But the only place that I know that has a raw milk dispenser at the moment is Suffolk, Bungay. I don't know of anyone local. And raw milk is so good. I love it. It's like chocolate milk, you know, but not. It's so sweet and so intense. And one thing that's cool about Baron by God, we sell their yogurts as well. You can really taste them on Billiard cows, and that profile of milk really comes through, which is cool. Is there such thing as a vintage cheese, like wine, say 1,000 cheese? Yeah, but maybe never eaten. Yeah, so it's a cheese called Pool, which is a donkey cheese. That is the most expensive cheese in the world. So that is a number of issues. It's a donkey. Their milk yields are very, very low, and yeah, their solids are very low. So you only can make a few of them around the year, and that tends to be the most expensive cheese in the world. That is, and that's called Pool, which is PLUE LE. That is, yeah. So yeah. Is there a Venezuelan beaver cheese? I think you're pulling my leg now. I think we'll leave it there.
I got a question for you, Perry, if I may. It's a bit of probably an unfair question for someone so passionate about cheese. Is there a cheese, do you think, that is overrated? It's almost more style over substance.
Well, that's a difficult one, really. What do you mean in the artisan world?
It's that one where perhaps people feel they should eat because It's trendy.
Yeah, I suppose the one that really gets to me a bit, and I'm guilty of selling it to a few delis, is probably Godminster, the purple organic wax cheddar. People absolutely love it. And it's a real upfront cheese, and you put it on a cheese board, and most people that are grazing and not engaging with the cheese with tasting notes will tend to find that to be their favourite. But it's made in a manufactured process. Massive blocks of cheddars, put in a giant grater. That grater is then forced through a pinwheel, and it spits out the cheese into perfect creamy molds into the wax and done. Where Montgomery's cheddar is turned 2 times a week for over 13 months. And that has far more longevity than Godminster. So I kind of do, that's the one that kind of does annoy me a little bit. That's okay.
Where are you, Perry, with the sort of fruits in cheese that we see? I mean, to me, it's like Mozart blended with Montevani. It's sort of like you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, I'm writing an article at the moment about the artisan culture and essentially what artisan is, which is all these cheeses in front of you. It's a person of craft that usually uses their hands, great skill, and kind of smaller volumes. And the large corporations with the blended cheese have started putting artisan on their chili cheeses and things like that. And as I was saying, that process of grating and extruding cheese is not artisan to me. It's manufactured. It's actually a very cheap way to make cheese, and there's no love and care that goes into it. And you usually find the blended cheeses are exactly the same. They're blended in an extruder, the fruit is dropped in this side and then molded together, and hey presto, there's no blending of flavors going on. They're simply cheddar with, you know, chives or something like that. But I do believe they have a massive position in the market. I think I mention this all the time, that, you know, David's son, you know, one day walked into a supermarket and saw, you know, mint chopped chip cheddar, thought he'd give it a go, and that started his path, you know, to wanting great cheese from delis and things like that. So I think they have a place in the market to hopefully provide people with a better understanding in the future and hopefully seek out more artisanal, deeper flavour cheeses. So
Perry, can I just Perry, can I just say that the farmers market on Ely has raw milk vendor.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. In Ely. Wow, that's good. So farmers market has a raw milk vendor, which I was completely unaware of. I knew the cheesemonger used to be on there, who's not there anymore, but yeah, like I didn't know they did raw milk. I'll be nipping over to there then.
Perry, just quickly on your point about mint choc chip cheese, it's reminded me, I get a lot of stick for having a nice slice of cheese on a chocolate biscuit. I think they go really well together. Yeah, I mean, we're going to gravitate back to blue cheese again, because blue cheese with a brownie, I'm coming up with this idea where I'm just going to do a box one day which has Perry's weird pairings. I've tried everything with cheese, and yeah, with the young buck, a lovely milk digestive is just absolutely spot on. So if you've got a milk digestive, please don't do it before you enjoy. I thought Jeff was running off there to grab a digestive, but no, it works. It works.
And Perry, my wife Emma's from Yorkshire, so as well as being quite common, she likes to eat cheese with fruit cake.
Yeah. Oh. I despise fruit cakes, so I can't get on board with that. I'm sorry, Emma. Any more questions? Let's move on to the blue, actually, because I'm keeping you in a bag. So this is the only raw milk blue cheese which is made in Northern Ireland. It was the first to be made in Northern Ireland by a really great chap called Mike, a good friend of mine, makes phenomenal cheese. And like I said, this is just a perfect profile cheese for me. So you can see the rind is quite wet. Smell, we've got digestive, little bit of hoppiness. The texture on the finger is really nice. It's kind of fudgy, which is quite cool. And in terms of flavour, I mean, just beautiful. A symphony of different flavours. I absolutely love it. The fudginess that's in there, the Marmite, the savoury at the end, the slight bit of twigglety kind of Marmite-y finishing. At the end, the perfumey aroma that kind of kicks through. It's just a perfect blue cheese, in my opinion. The texture is absolutely sensational and lovely and creamy. If you love blue cheese, you know, I think this is the one. What does everyone think about that?
I won't lie, we've eaten a lot of this already before you started the tasting of this. It's absolutely delicious.
It's one of these cheeses which you almost need to snapshot in your mind. Like if you know, all of our palates are different, you know, and, you know, I'm a world cheese judge and whatever, but all our palates are different. But this cheese is so exceptional, it would win awards, and it would never be like this again. You know, and that's not through a lack of trying, that's the nature of raw milk artisan cheese. Everything, all those variables, all the turning, all the brushing, all the, you know, deciding to move into different, all team up to one area and create just simply one of the best blue cheeses that I've ever had in my life. I absolutely love this cheese.
Yeah, I agree. This is my favorite of the 5 as well.
Awesome.
So can I just ask, so if I say I love this cheese, Perry, I want to have this cheese every week for the next 52 weeks.
Yeah.
Is it possible? So can you do a style? So obviously this cheese, you've mentioned all the variables, so it sounds like each cheese can be quite unique, but obviously there must be some sort of style. So is that possible to sort of say, you know, like, I don't know, like we buy cheddar or whatever, a cheese is a cheese, but yeah.
It's possible. This cheese will always have, not possible, it's improbable. The reality is this cheese is a raw milk Stilton. It will always have anchors in hoppy, digestive umami. That's the anchors. But when you get them working so well in a, you know, this cheese probably would be like this, I reckon, for another 30 days on the batches that I've got remaining. And then we might get lucky and it might work again. But it's highly likely that this cheese will not be like the way it is ever again. And that's the beauty of artisan cheese. You know, wine, you can bottle vintages, stack them higher and sell them. Cheese, you need a really experienced cheesemonger to hopefully open you up to these experiences and say, what are you fancying today? A sweet cheese. Well, Kern profile is sensational at the moment. And that's what we kind of do. We try and match profiles to those really rewarding experiences. But I love this cheese, and it's just, I've got one actually, I might show you quickly. So this is what I wrap them like. I don't know if you can see that. So I wrap these heavily. The moisture on the rind with blue cheeses, what I find out is that it decreases bitterness, which is quite cool within cheese. I haven't worked out the science behind that, but it's something I'm applying to all my blues. And I've started doing that over the last 7 months, and we're getting profiles like this and similar in those veins. So most of you will be asking, which we spoke about earlier, you know, how do I know? So I have, you know, 15 to 16 of these cheeses in a batch, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the mat. And I use this thing, which is called a cheese iron. So this thing is like a T shape, and it's got a cylindrical middle, which is hollowed out. And then this one's a cheddar one, so it's slightly longer. And I put the cheese, the plunger in there, give it a little twist like that. Out comes the core of the cheese. So this cheese here is not the profile. This is this is the new batch, I suppose. So I've got 15 cheeses remaining like this, and these are my new batches that I'm working on now. Now, it's hard to see, I know, but look how dry it is. You know, you've got, and it won't be a bad cheese, but you can see the crumbling cracks that's happened on there. The moisture on the bottom is indicating to me that if I mature it for longer, it's only going to get drier. So it's drier in the curd. So something's telling me the next cheeses that I'm going to be maturing when this batch runs out are just not going to be as good. And that's just, oh, and I'll pop this in, put my finger over it, put it down. No one's the wiser, and then I sell that to Midsummer House. And yeah, that's kind of the idea. So if you get to see, you know, just the difference in, that's a 4 weeks difference. That's a 4 week make difference between the batch that you're trying now. And then, because I can't do the comparative, you can hopefully see from the texture, and you know, where this one is quite squidgy, if you push it down, it's almost slightly spreadable. The other one was very crumbly. It was almost like a Wensleydale style. So something's telling me that this is a profile to be admired, and you know, is what it is. I'm curious to see if Simon is still with us and if he survived the.
Thank you, Perry. Yes, it was not unpleasant at all. It was quite creamy, but it wouldn't be my favourite, which is perhaps because of a historical avoidance of eating it sort of other than in soup. We were blown away by the first one. Honestly, we thought the first one still was absolutely fantastic, and I must credit you with what you did with the fourth cheese, because as you quite rightly said, it completely took all the other tastes out to allow us to have that last one. So it's genius. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, they're all fantastic, and I'm a big lover of Kern, like I said, and it's a style that we're not particularly good at making in the UK. Scolded cheeses. So the curds that you got your milk, you cut the milk when it sets like a jelly, you remove your whey and your curds, and then you scald the curds, which is you heat the temperature up. That allows more moisture to evaporate from the cheeses while it's sitting in whey, and provides a lot of sweetness. It's not something we're particularly good, because normally they're made in mountains, you know, and they're mountain style cheeses for a reason. So I'm so proud that we've got something like this, and I think we've got to be making more and more styles like that.
Perry, is it sacrilege to wrap the cheeses in cling film?
I mean, no, it's not. What you're going to do is just ruin the flavour of the cheese. So yeah, maybe it is. No, it's not. What happens is that if you store cheese in cling film, as I keep on saying, cheese is alive. It's breathing all the time. It's losing moisture. The moisture that it wants to lose, because it wants to expel it, will be trapped in the cling film. And that moisture, even if it's granular, will settle, even if it's too small to see, will settle in the bottom of the cheese, and it will just go bitter. It will just taste tainted. And I find that all the time. And that's, you know, if I don't turn the cheese often, and, you know, that's what can happen in my cheeses if I get a bit lazy. But if you need to wrap it in cling film, go ahead. You know, I provided cheese paper in your boxes though, so.
You did. It was a pleasure to open them, I have to say.
Awesome. I'm glad.
Perry,
so, I'm interested in setting up a creamery on my farm. What cheese should we create? What's either missing or what's the most profitable?
Oh, okay. Well, first things first. Profitable, I'm afraid. But what I would look at doing would, I think I would start with a young lactic fresh cheese. So a lactic set cheese, which would be maybe like a goat's cheese. If you had access to goat's milk, that is, to be fair.
Well, I can't think how you do it.
Sorry?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what.
A young lactic goat's cheeses, utilising geotrichum. I mean, you could do with that with cows, creating a nice ripply rind, nothing too overpowering. It would need a quick turnaround to get it out, but I think as being one of the only cheesemakers in the Cambridge kind of local area, if that's where you are, you have a big benefit to supplying a lot of people.
Thank you.
My question, Perry, was I vaguely remember watching a Rick Stein's Secret France program because I was bored, and I think he went to a place where they make Comté cheese, and I'm sure he said that it was you know, one of the most expensive cheeses in the world, but he didn't explain why. Is that a fair reflection?
Not really. I mean, that's quite I mean, Comté is quite a commodity in France now, actually. You know, it's not that expensive, you know. Yeah, I don't know what he means by that, to be honest. He might have been talking, did he talk about Celers by any chance?
I've had a few glasses of wine since that programme, so I can't remember.
So there's a cheese that I made in France, which I was challenged to make, which is called Celers, and that is deep in the Auvergne region mountains. A traditional Celers, not a manufactured Celers, is not using any mechanical equipment. So using horses and cows to transport large cheeses, lifting 25 kilos, sometimes larger vats of cheese. They use traditional wooden buckets, all that kind of business. I know that is near Comté, France, kind of region. So it may have been there because they do look kind of similar in thingy. But yeah, Comté isn't hugely expensive. I mean, the place where I trained is an old abandoned railway station, and it's underground and it's absolutely gorgeous. Thousands of cheeses at 32 kilos each. And you work in there and you work for sort of 12 to 14 hours straight. And you get these big cheeses down. You use your cheese iron to tap on the top to listen to see if there's any of those ripples and bursts that I was talking about, because we don't want any exploding cheeses. Tasting one of the batches, working out a rule of ascension. So essentially, a lot of people like to make cheese and then say, well, this cheese here from day one is going to be 32 months old. And that will just sell. It's not the way you should mature affinage cheese. You should be looking at the profiles and working out, can it go longer? Will it be better if it goes longer? So I got to all those mechanisms to work out if a cheese has longer life in there. But it's like beautiful. I was in there and it's one of those moments where you're like, this is my job. You know, it's like beautiful sprawling canals and cheeses stacked so high. And it was almost like a gospel kind of moment. And then my French colleagues came in and their techno radios came on and they're all kind of like, it's just a standard job to them. So I had this serene moment where, you know, I felt almost like I was spiritually connected to cheese. And then the French colleagues came in and switched on the radio and it was just blasting techno down the hall.
Does anyone use traditional Rennet, or is it all the bio reactor Rennet?
So to be honest, about 4 or 5 years ago, traditional rennet, you couldn't detect it in the flavour. Vegetarian rennet, which can be derived from thistles or fig sap to coagulate the milk, set the milk like jelly. Now it was very bitter, and now it's not so much actually. So I think the rules are changing in terms of more artisans getting involved in vegetarian cheeses, but the traditionals that mostly I like to work out would use traditional animal rennet.
Is there a rule of thumb for putting together a classic cheese board for, say, I don't know, a dinner party or a gathering, as in with regards to mixing hard cheeses, soft cheeses, blue cheeses, aged cheeses, etc.?
Soft, hard, blue, something that you like. That's all you need to do. Soft, hard, blue, you tick all the boxes, and then if you're going to the deli counter, just make sure you get yourself something that looks interesting. Or get something wacky, you know, something that's going to just challenge the crowd a bit more. But soft, hard, blue works, you know. I craft all these boards to hit at different levels to hopefully give a real nice rounded experience. Or talk to a great cheesemonger, go down there, have a chat with them, tell them what you want to do, and hopefully they should be able to help you and steer you in the right direction.
Or get in contact with you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was intimating that, yeah, of course, I'd love to speak to you guys, love to organise cheese boards anytime for you guys, but, you know, we've got to buy British cheese from everywhere, not just me, right? That's probably.
I think it's nice though to have British cheese board though. That's you know, that's something that's not often what you come by. So to be able to put together a full British cheese board is wonderful.
Yeah, and steadfast being committed to just doing British is quite difficult. You know, that because there's always people who want different stuff, you know. Yeah, and Gareth is quite right. I do a mystery cheese box every week. So if you ever did need 5 cheeses in an emergency, you know, you can log online and we just fire you out a box of my favourite cheeses of that week. So, and they come with tasting notes and everything. And also you get a video of me in here talking through the cheeses and shouting about them. So
perfect. Thank you very much. Great selling point.
That was my ending. You stole that. Gareth, gosh. I just very quickly saw that we had a question from Jerry. Jerry, did you want to unmute and ask your question? Or did you want me to ask it?
I can put it up there. Jerry, yeah.
Right.
Oh, there we go. He's unmuted. Go, Jerry.
Yeah. Right. One of my favourite cheeses, they're Plus, and I've been eating it for a number of years. The problem is that when you buy it from Waitrose, they actually give it to you in a plastic pot. And you put it in the fridge, and it's lovely. And then your wife tells you to move it into the garage. And then, you know, it's a beautiful flavour. And then you're having to put it in the garden. And you know it's getting right when the neighbours are moving. So is there a point where, you know, Epoisse, you know, you have to stop eating it and say, actually, this has gone too far? Because, you know, it's a beautiful cheese, but it really ripens very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the natural, the bee linens. They're just very aggressive molds and they just will break down that cheese so fast. And then they will naturally die quite quickly. And when they die, they essentially become ammonia. And that's one of the worst smells that you can get within cheese. But, so, you know, ammonia can have a really good, significant, important presence within cheese. It actually breaks down the interior of the cheeses very quickly. So, yeah, I mean, there's a point really, and that point would be different for every Epoisse, but it's pretty manufactured now, Epoisse, to be honest. So I'm thinking like, you know, 2-3 weeks after, I think you're losing its best, to be honest.
Yeah.
You're eating it for the sake of strength, not for its complexity and its meaty kind of notes that it has.
I asked the question to save my marriage.
Did it work, Jerry? Did it help?
Well, she's still here.
Oh, good. Good. All right. Well, any last questions? Is that okay? Okay. Well, gosh, Perry, thank you so much. It's so lovely to see someone so extremely passionate about what they do. And I've learned loads, and I'm sure everybody else on the call has as well. And I'm absolutely certain we will have a good. Should we, Marcel? You're a scientist. Should we have? Is this enough of a test group to see whether we will get nightmares? If everybody reports, if everybody reports back tomorrow, let us know if you've had nightmares.
It depends what the average number of nightmares.
Oh, okay. Now you're getting too scientific. Thank you.
Do vivid dreams count? Do vivid dreams count as nightmares then?
Okay, let's go with vivid dreams. Actually, I quite like that. Yeah, let's go with vivid dreams tomorrow, nightmares or otherwise. You don't have to tell us the content. You just have to tell us whether they happened. Simon and Ray, can you please check in and let us know tomorrow that you're okay? You've survived this cheese tasting. And it's just something completely else. Obviously, we usually have our dinners, and it's more of a business occasion. But it's so lovely to see people with partners here as well, helping them, you know, consume the cheese and wine. So that's been really, really nice, actually. And it's something else that these webinars have actually brought to the Cambridge 100 Club. As Gareth and Perry mentioned, I saw today that you do a mystery cheese box, which sounds fantastic. So how do we get to know about that, Perry? I mean, I think I saw it on Facebook, but is it anywhere else on Twitter or?
Just Google Rennet and Rind, cheesemongers at Cambridge. We're come up, and you know, my number's on the website. You know, any questions, we love, as you can tell, because I could have spoken for another 4 hours about cheese. I love talking about cheese. So if you have any questions, just give me a call. If you're planning something special or doing whatever, or looking for a particular style cheese or profile, just give me a call, and we'll work out. That could be mystery box or whatever, and I'll work it out for you.
Fantastic. And then our next Cambridge 100, I think, is the 21st of May. So put that in the diary. I think it's going to be another culinary experience, but details are to be finalized. And I figured I'll ask everybody to just unmute and just give, I mean, there's nothing quite like a Zoom applause. But to unmute and try and give Perry the biggest Zoom applause you can muster. That doesn't sound weird. Oh, there we go. That's lovely.
Bravo!
And thanks so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you very much, Perry. And we will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
Yeah, take care.